This is a short slide to give you some understanding of RTI and how it fits into the whole realm of, in general, school systems at this point. This is Indiana's illustration of what response to instruction should be, and I like it because it shows that the students can move between those three tiers depending on whether they have a skill deficit or not. Tier 1 is the general classroom instruction, your core instruction. Tier 2 is a small group intervention for a specific skill deficit, and then at Tier 3 is when a student is not responding to Tier 2. They then go to Tier 3 and get much more intensive instruction. And there are two program models. There's a problem-solving model and there's a standard protocol model. As an administrator, you will definitely be helping set up what type of model your school will be using to look at your students individually. On the top you see the problem-solving model, and it's very individualized, where you define, analyze, decide what to do, and then implement the plan with fidelity. Fidelity meaning exactly the way the intervention was done in the research, and then evaluate the progress. The bottom one is much less individualized, in that you kind of look at what skill deficit the child has, and then you automatically have an intervention that you use for that skill deficit. So you kind of have a group of interventions that you just pick from. Instead of on the problem-solving model, you really look at the student and you really look at several different types of interventions and don't necessarily use the same one for the same groups of students. Treatment fidelity, again, is making sure that whatever interventions are used are done exactly the way the evidence-based research says. And this is kind of an illustration from Jim Knight from a workshop I went to. And I just think it's real interesting and important to look at that when the dialogue is between the administrator and the teacher is about data, it generally tends to go a lot better than if you were to have the administrator and data on the bottom and talking about the teacher. It's just something to kind of think about, and if you can keep focused with the teacher on the data, it keeps it from getting personal. Response to instruction and intervention. Schools identify students at risk for poor learning outcomes. Monitoring of the progress is very important so that you make sure that your intervention is actually working. These need to be evidence-based interventions, and depending on what the student needs, you decide on the intensity of those interventions and the amount of time that they get. It really is set up to look at the responsiveness of the student to the intervention. And it started out being an issue for learning disabilities, but it has broadened to behavioral concerns also. So in a lot of places they're looking at literacy, math, and behavior as it relates to this response to instruction or intervention. These are the 5 principles of RTI. Very importantly, it's proactive and preventative. Hopefully, if it will stop students that maybe didn't need special education intervention that were getting it before. It's real important that the skill deficit that the student have be matched with the intervention and the curriculum that's being provided for them. In general, it's problem solving, and it's real important that you use effective and research-based practices. And it's usually a systems level approach, and generally it's a 3-tiered approach. And this is just a list of things that occur at Tier 1, and it really is important that if you're beginning RTI in your school, that your students are having proficiency, 80% proficiency at the Tier 1 level, because if you don't have 80% of the students having proficiency at that level, you then are having a massive amount of students at the Tier 2 and Tier 3 level. So it's really worth your time to spend more time making sure that 80% of the students in your classroom are being proficient. This is a list of Tier 2 information, and you can read that. And this is a smaller group. And then Tier 3 information, and that is a much more intense, much more high level, and it occurs much more often, as you can read here. That type of reviewed. This is just kind of an illustration of the universal design for learning that states that all individuals should have an equal opportunity to learn. And I found this in a magazine that a teacher had done, and you may not know, but previously, or still in a lot of places, the tiers are in triangles, and the bottom one being Tier 1 and successively up Tier 2 and Tier 3. And if you put two triangles and turn them sideways, I just thought this was a very interesting illustration. You get a bell curve. So if in fact things are occurring correctly in a classroom, you should only be servicing the kids in Tier 2 and Tier 3. You should only be servicing students who are at either end of that bell triangle. And this is just some explanation about what fidelity of implementation is. Again, it needs to be scientifically based research, and as administrators, it's really important that you make sure that the interventions that your classroom teachers are using are scientifically based. A lot of things appear to be scientifically based, but they may not be scientifically based for the grade level, or they may not have something that's really important is a control group, because if there is no control group, there's nothing to compare it to. The research needs to have been replicated in multiple studies. The information needs to be able to be generalized for a larger population, and it needs to have been peer reviewed. RTI can be seen as in two terms: response to intervention or response to instruction, depending on where you are. One has more of an emphasis on the actual interventions you do with the students, and the other has more to do with the actual general instruction that occurs so that the intervention may not need to occur, and why it's important. And this is just some ideas about what school teams could look like.